In the summer of 1966, a nation declared war on itself. A revolution not against a foreign invader, but against its own past, its own culture, its own parents. It was called the Great Proletarian Cultural Revolution. For 10 years, China descended into a madness orchestrated from the very top. Students turned on their teachers. Children denounced their parents. And neighbors became mortal enemies. But this was not a spontaneous chaos. It was a meticulously planned political masterpiece of terror. To understand China today, you must first understand the devil's playbook that wrote its yesterday. To understand the Cultural Revolution, you must first understand the man who lit the fuse, Mao Zedong. By the 1960s, he was more than a leader. He was a god king, the architect of modern China. His word was truth. But this god had a secret, a failure so catastrophic it threatened to shatter his divine image. His great leap forward, a utopian dream to industrialize China overnight, had plunged the nation into the deadliest famine in human history. By some estimates, over 30 million people starved to death. It was not a natural disaster. It was a man-made one. For the first time, the god bled. At a conference of 7,000 party officials, Mao was forced to admit fault. His power, once absolute, was slipping. The daily running of the country fell to others, men like President Liu Shaoqi. And then news came from Moscow that chilled Mao to the bone. Nikita Khrushchev, the man who succeeded Stalin, had publicly denounced him, posthumously erasing him from Soviet history. Mao saw his own future. He became consumed by a paranoid fear that when he died, China's Khrushchev, Liu Shaoqi, would do the same to him. To save himself, he decided he had to destroy the very party that had begun to doubt him. He needed an army, one that was outside the system, loyal only to him, and utterly ruthless. He found his army in China's schools. The students were the perfect weapon. Born after 1949, they were a generation raised on a single, unwavering truth. Chairman Mao is the sun in the sky. They had been indoctrinated, not educated. The party's newspaper was their only reality. They truly believed the Great Famine was a natural disaster. They were a blank slate. Mao then executed a multi-step masterstroke of social engineering. First, he created an army of the aimless by abolishing the national college entrance exams. Overnight, he severed the only path to a future for tens of millions of urban youths, redirecting their personal desperation into political hatred for a vague class enemy. Second, he gave the first green light. When the first big character poster attacking university officials appeared at Peking University, Mao celebrated it, ordering it to be broadcast across the nation. This was the signal. Attacking authority was now a revolutionary act. Chaos erupted on campuses. Third, he weaponized mobility. To forge localized chaos into a national force, Mao initiated the Great Networking, making the national railway system free for all Red Guards. This was not a field trip. It was a state-sponsored virus-spreading operation. Revolutionary tactics from Beijing were rapidly exported, and the act of travel itself was dehumanizing. A student might hesitate to brutally beat a teacher they knew, but a mob of strangers from another city had no such reservations. Finally came the coronation. Mao stood atop Tiananmen Gate and reviewed over 11 million Red Guards. It was here he performed a crucial piece of political theater. A high-ranking official's daughter, Song Binbin, placed a Red Guard armband on him. This choice was deliberate. The first and most violent Red Guards were children of the party elite who believed in a bloodline theory. If the father is a hero, the son is a good man. If the father is a reactionary, the son is a bastard. By choosing one of them, Mao was endorsing their violent sense of entitlement. When he heard her name meant gentle and refined, he famously replied, "Be martial." This was a divine decree. A living God was telling an army of lost teenagers that all rules, all laws, all morality were now suspended. At this point, you might ask, where were the police? The answer is simple. Mao issued the Public Security 6 Articles, a directive explicitly forbidding the police from interfering with the revolutionary students. The state's monopoly on violence was deliberately handed over to teenagers. With these moves, an army of millions, loyal only to Mao's personal will, was instantly forged.
But here lies the most cunning part of Mao's plan. His ultimate target was President Liu Shaoqi, his rival. So why did this new army first unleash its fury, not on the powerful, but on the most powerless members of society? This was not a mistake. It was a 3-act play of terror.
Act 1 was the initiation by violence. To turn a student into a ruthless tool, you must first make them commit an act of public, brutal violence. Attacking a defenseless old teacher was a threshold-crossing event, a public rite of passage. With their hands stained by this violence, they could never go back.
Act 2 was the paralysis test. The assault on class enemies was a risk-free stress test. When Mao saw that the entire state security apparatus stood down, he had his answer. His authority was absolute. The system was paralyzed. Act 3 was creating the pretext. The chaos of the Red August in Beijing created a nationwide hysteria. Now Mao could finally point his finger at the real target, declaring, "Why is there so much chaos? Because there is a traitor at the very top, protecting them." In that 1 month, in Beijing alone, at least 1,772 people were beaten to death. Over 33,000 homes were ransacked. In Daxing County, 325 people were killed in just 5 days. The oldest was 80 years old. The youngest was just 38 days old. The writer Lao She, a national treasure, was so brutally humiliated that he walked to a lake and drowned himself. With his army blooded and the state paralyzed, Mao finally unleashed them on his true enemy.
With Mao's new order, bombard the headquarters, the Red Guards turned on the party itself. Liu Shaoqi, the president of China, was dragged from his office, branded a traitor, renegade, and scab. He was relentlessly tortured, denied medical treatment. He died, alone and in agony, buried under a false name. His rival, Deng Xiaoping, was purged and sent to a tractor factory. His son, Deng Pufang, was tormented until he jumped or was thrown from a building, leaving him paralyzed for life. With the headquarters destroyed, did the chaos end? No. The Devil's Playbook entered its most bloody chapter. A new model emerged in Shanghai, the January Storm, where worker rebels directed by Mao's allies like Zhang Chunshao and Wang Hongwen overthrew the city government. Mao celebrated this and gave a new order to the nation: seize power. This order was like throwing raw meat into a cage of starved wolves. The once united Red Guards instantly fractured into hundreds of warring factions, each claiming to be the most revolutionary. The only way to prove it was to annihilate your rivals. This was the descent into full-blown civil war. They raided army barracks for weapons. Soon, rifles, machine guns, and grenades became standard. In cities like Chongqing, factions armed themselves with artillery, tanks, and even makeshift gunboats on the river. Mao, watching the country burn, reportedly said, "Let them fight. It's good practice for a future war." The final death toll is unknown, but estimates run into the millions.
By 1968, Mao's goals were achieved. His enemies were dead or broken. The old party structure was shattered, but he had created a monster he could no longer control. The armed, warring factions were now a threat to his new order. It was time to dispose of the weapon. In a masterstroke of political theater, Mao sent unarmed teams of factory workers into the universities to restore order. At Tsinghua University, the radical Red Guards opened fire, killing 5 workers and injuring over 700. This was the ultimate political sin. The self-proclaimed vanguard of the proletariat had murdered the actual proletariat. This gave Mao the perfect excuse. In a dramatic late-night meeting, he summoned the 5 top Red Guard leaders, including Peking University's Nie Yuanzi and Tsinghua's Kuai Daifu. He reportedly wept, telling them, "You have let me down." He declared that their historic mission was over. Then came the final betrayal. With a new slogan, "The vast countryside is a great place to have a promising future," Mao exiled an entire generation. Tens of millions of Red Guards were packed onto trains and shipped to the poorest corners of China, ostensibly to learn from the peasants. They were discarded like a spent weapon. Their education was stolen, their youth destroyed. The leaders suffered fates that were a dark mirror of their former glory. Nie Yuanzi was imprisoned for 17 years, Kuai Daifu the same. Han Eijing of Beihang University, who had tortured a famed marshal, was jailed for 15 years. Tan Haolan of Beijing Normal University, who led the destruction of Confucius's temple, died of cancer while under investigation. The last, Wang Dabin, was sentenced to 9 years. And for the millions of ordinary followers, their reward was a lifetime of hard labor and poverty, lost to history. They had been promised a revolution to build a new world. Instead, they were used to destroy an old one, only to be destroyed themselves. They were the ultimate victims of the very devil's playbook they had so eagerly executed. The ghost of the Cultural Revolution has never truly left China, and its legacy, its methods, and its underlying logic continue to haunt the nation to this day.
That's all for today. The conversation continues in the comments below. If this story must be told, help us tell it. Like, subscribe, and share. We'll see you next time.